The glass doors of Henderson and Associates swung open as I stepped into the familiar chaos of Monday morning. Coffee brewing, phones ringing, keyboards clicking in their endless symphony. I carried my worn canvas bag and clutched a simple notepad. Nothing flashy, nothing that screamed ambition. Just another face in the sea of cubicles. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. But today was different. Today, I had a small device tucked discreetly in my shirt pocket, no bigger than a pen cap. Voice activated. Crystal clear recording quality. I'd bought it 3 weeks ago after the incident in the break room, when Victoria Chen made sure everyone heard her opinion about my tragic fashion choices and complete lack of professional presence. Victoria was Henderson and Associates Senior Marketing Director, the undisputed queen bee of our floor. Designer suits that cost more than most people's monthly rent, perfect hair that never moved despite Chicago's unpredictable weather, and connections that reached all the way to the C-suite. She'd made my life miserable for 8 months now. Ever since I'd been transferred to her department from the satellite office in Portland, the transfer had been my choice, though nobody here knew that. They saw a quiet woman in discount blazers, who kept her head down and never spoke up in meetings. They had no idea I'd specifically requested the move to study Henderson's internal operations. I settled into my desk, the same corner spot I'd occupied since my transfer. Close enough to hear everything, invisible enough to be forgotten. Victoria's voice carried across the open floor plan as she held court near the printer station, surrounded by her usual cluster of admirers, people who laughed too loudly at her jokes and competed for scraps of her approval. "I'm just saying," she said, loud enough for half the office to hear, "some people really need to understand that this isn't community college. We have standards here." Her eyes flicked toward my direction, and I knew exactly who she was talking about. Rachel Morrison from accounting giggled nervously, her laugh sharp and uncomfortable. Tom Bradley from IT nodded along, desperate for Victoria's approval. Jennifer Walsh from HR pretended to read emails but was clearly listening to every word. I opened my laptop and began typing, but my hand brushed against the tiny recording device. 3 weeks of careful preparation had led to this moment. Victoria had no idea that her reign of workplace terror was about to come to an end. She approached my desk with that predatory smile I'd grown to recognize. The one that preceded humiliation, usually delivered with an audience present to witness my supposed incompetence. "Sarah, honey," she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness, "I need you to redo the entire Patterson presentation. The client called this morning. Apparently your work was amateur hour." Their words, not mine. I looked up calmly, my fingers still poised over the keyboard. "Which client? Patterson Industries or Patterson Marketing Group?" Victoria's smile faltered for just a second. She clearly hadn't expected me to ask for clarification. "Does it matter? Just fix it by noon." But I'd worked on both Patterson accounts in the past month. There were no client calls scheduled today. I'd checked the calendar system twice that morning. This was just another manufactured crisis, another attempt to make me look incompetent in front of the team while positioning herself as the problem solver who had to clean up my messes. "Of course," I said quietly, pressing the tiny button on my recording device. "I'll get right on that." Victoria turned on her heel, her designer heels clicking against the polished floor like a countdown timer. As she walked away, I heard her mutter to Rachel, "Some people just can't handle real corporate pressure. I don't know why David keeps giving her these important accounts." The comment was calculated, designed to plant seeds of doubt about my competence while subtly undermining my relationship with our department head. Classic Victoria, never a direct attack, always plausible deniability. What Victoria didn't know was that I'd been handling real corporate pressure for the past 5 years as a senior analyst at Morrison & Klein in Portland. My quarterly reports had saved that company $3 million in operational costs. I'd managed teams twice the size of our current department. I'd been personally recruited by 3 Fortune 500 companies before accepting the Portland position, but when my husband got transferred to Chicago for his medical residency, I'd taken what seemed like a lateral move at Henderson and Associates. On paper, it looked like a step down, a senior analyst taking a regular analyst position. In reality, I'd been quietly building something much bigger. The break room incident 3 weeks ago had been the final straw. I'd been heating up leftover pasta when Victoria walked in with Angela Foster from Client Relations. They'd started talking about the upcoming Hartford project, but their conversation quickly devolved into gossip about team members. "Did you see Sarah's presentation last week?" Victoria had said, not bothering to lower her voice even though I was standing right there. I had to completely redo the financial projections. Basic mistakes that a first-year intern wouldn't make. That presentation had been flawless. I'd triple-checked every calculation, cross-referenced every data point. The mistakes Victoria claimed to find were fabrications, designed to justify her taking credit for my work. "I don't understand how she got this job," Angela had replied, playing along with Victoria's narrative. "Maybe it's because David feels sorry for her. You know, diversity hire and all that." I stood there, fork halfway to my mouth, watching these two women tear apart my professional reputation over their lunch salads. That's when I'd made the decision to start documenting everything. The recording device had cost me $200. A significant expense on my current salary, but worth every penny. For 3 weeks, I'd captured Victoria's toxic behavior, the fabricated complaints about my work, the deliberate exclusion from important meetings, the snide comments designed to undermine my confidence and credibility, but today felt different. Today, I could sense that Victoria was escalating her campaign against me. The Patterson presentation demand was just the beginning. By 11:30 a.m., I'd finished fixing the Patterson presentation, which had required no changes whatsoever, just as I'd suspected. The original work was solid, comprehensive, and exactly what the client had requested in their brief. But I'd learned to play Victoria's games, so I made a few cosmetic adjustments and saved it under a new file name. At 11:45, Victoria called an impromptu team meeting. The conference room filled with nervous energy. Her meetings were usually battlegrounds where someone got publicly humiliated for the entertainment of others. "I wanted to address some serious concerns about work quality," she began, pacing in front of the whiteboard like a prosecutor presenting her case to a jury. "It's come to my attention that some team members seem to think that mediocrity is acceptable here at Henderson and Associates." She launched into a 20-minute speech about maintaining excellence and weeding out weak links. Every pointed comment, every thinly veiled insult was captured by the device in my pocket. But this time, she was being bolder, more direct in her attacks. "When clients start complaining about substandard work," she continued, "it reflects on all of us. It damages our reputation, our credibility, our ability to secure future contracts." I sat quietly in my usual spot at the back of the room, taking notes as if I were genuinely concerned about these fabricated client complaints. Around me, my colleagues shifted uncomfortably. Some shot sympathetic glances in my direction. They knew exactly who Victoria was targeting. "Sarah," Victoria said suddenly, turning her laser focus on me, "since you seem to be struggling with basic presentation standards, I'm going to need you to start copying Rachel on all your client communications. Just until we can get you back up to speed." The room went silent. This wasn't just professional criticism, this was public humiliation designed to strip away my autonomy and credibility. Having Rachel monitor my communications would essentially brand me as incompetent in front of the entire team. "I appreciate the guidance," I said calmly, my hand unconsciously touching the recording device. "Though I'm curious about the specific client feedback you mentioned. Could you forward me those emails so I can understand exactly what needs improvement?" Victoria's smile turned razor sharp. "Client confidentiality prevents me from sharing those details. You'll just have to trust my assessment." Of course. No emails existed because no complaints had been made. But demanding to see evidence had put Victoria in an uncomfortable position. She'd have to either admit she was lying or fabricate documentation. But then something unexpected happened. The conference room door opened, and David Park, our department head, stepped inside. Victoria's demeanor shifted instantly, the claws retracted, the predatory smile became warm and professional. "David." "Perfect timing," she said, her voice suddenly melodious. "I was just discussing our Q3 performance metrics with the team." David nodded politely, but his attention was focused on me. "Sarah, could I see you in my office after this meeting?" The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Victoria's face went pale beneath her carefully applied makeup. In 8 months, David had never requested a private meeting with anyone from our team, except her. "Is everything all right?" Victoria asked, her voice tight with barely concealed concern. "Just some routine discussion about project assignments." David replied evenly, but there was something in his tone that suggested otherwise. The meeting ended abruptly after that. Victoria tried to maintain her composure, but I could see the cracks forming in her facade. She'd built her power on the assumption that she was David's trusted lieutenant, the only one with his ear. A private meeting between David and her primary target threatened that entire narrative. A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. 20 minutes later, I sat across from David in his corner office, the Chicago skyline stretching out behind him through floor-to-ceiling windows. He closed the door carefully and took his seat, his expression unreadable. "Sarah, I'm going to be direct with you," he said, leaning forward slightly. I've been reviewing your work over the past few months, and frankly, I'm confused. My heart sank. Had Victoria's campaign against me finally succeeded? Had her constant undermining convinced David that I was truly incompetent? Your analysis of the Morrison account was exceptional, he continued, and I felt a flutter of surprise. Your cost-benefit projections for the Taylor merger were not just accurate, they were insightful. And your risk assessment report for the Hartford project? That was graduate-level strategic thinking. I blinked, uncertain where this was heading. So I have to ask, David said, his dark eyes studying my face, why are you working as a junior analyst under Victoria when your experience and output clearly qualify you for senior-level positions? The question hung in the air between us like a bridge I'd been waiting 8 months to cross. This was the moment I'd been working toward, but I hadn't expected it to come like this. I wanted to understand the company culture before making any moves, I said carefully, choosing my words with precision. David leaned back in his chair, his fingers steepled. And what have you learned about our culture? I reached into my pocket and placed the small recording device on his polished mahogany desk. The tiny black object seemed enormous in the sudden silence. I've learned that some people mistake cruelty for leadership, I said quietly. His eyebrows rose slightly, and he reached for the device. Is that what I think it is? 3 weeks of documented workplace harassment, I said, my voice steady despite the gravity of the moment. Fabricated client complaints, deliberate sabotage of project timelines, public humiliation designed to undermine my credibility and force me out of the department. David picked up the device, turning it over in his hands like he was examining evidence in a criminal case. This is serious, Sarah. Very serious. I know. That's why I documented everything meticulously. He plugged the device into his computer, and for the next hour and 20 minutes, we listened to Victoria's voice echoing through his office speakers. Her condescending comments about my clothes, my background, my supposed incompetence. Her false accusations about client complaints. Her attempts to poison other team members against me. There was the conversation where she told Rachel that I was probably on my way out anyway. These diversity hires never last long. The meeting where she'd claimed my Hartford analysis was amateur work that I had to completely restructure, when in fact she'd presented it to the client unchanged, taking full credit. With each recording, David's expression grew darker. I watched him take notes, occasionally pausing the playback to ask for context or clarification. There's more, I said when the audio evidence was finished, opening my laptop. Email chains where she deliberately excluded me from critical meetings, then blamed me for being out of the loop. Project timelines that show her systematic interference with my work. Performance reviews where she documented problems that never occurred. David was quiet for a long moment after we finished reviewing everything. Finally, he looked up at me with something that looked like respect mixed with regret. How long have you been planning this documentation? He asked. Since the second week she started targeting me, I admitted. I knew she was trying to push me out. I just wanted to make sure I had enough evidence to protect myself and potentially help any future targets. And your background check when we hired you, you were a senior analyst at Morrison & Klein. For 5 years. I managed the West Coast operations team and specialized in hostile acquisition analysis. David nodded slowly, pieces clicking into place. The transfer here wasn't a lateral move for you, was it? It was a step down. On paper, yes. But my husband's residency program brought us to Chicago, and I'd heard interesting things about Henderson's growth potential. I wanted to see the operation from the inside before pursuing advancement opportunities. And instead, you found Victoria. I found a systemic problem that Victoria represents, I corrected gently. She's not the only one engaging in this behavior, she's just the most blatant about it. David was quiet for another moment, processing everything he'd heard and seen. Finally, he looked up at me with a question that would change everything. Sarah, I'm going to ask you something, and I want you to think carefully before you answer. I waited, my hands folded calmly in my lap. How would you feel about Victoria's position? The next morning, Victoria strode into the office with her usual confidence, completely unaware that her world was about to change. She made her rounds, distributing criticism and condescension like a queen dispensing royal judgments. She critiqued Jennifer's client presentation, questioned Tom's project timeline, and made Rachel reprint reports that were perfectly fine the first time. At 9:47 a.m., she stopped by my desk with a fresh assignment designed to humiliate me further. Sarah, I need you to audit all of last quarter's expense reports, she said loud enough for nearby colleagues to hear. Apparently there are some discrepancies that need to be investigated. It was busy work, the kind of task typically assigned to interns or new hires. The implication was clear, I couldn't be trusted with real responsibilities. Of course, I said, accepting the stack of files with the same calm demeanor I'd maintained for 8 months. At 10:15 a.m., David's assistant, Margaret, approached Victoria's desk. Victoria? Mr. Park would like to see you in his office. Of course. He would, Victoria said with a knowing smile, checking her reflection in her phone's camera. Probably wants to discuss my promotion to regional director. I've been expecting this conversation. She gathered her things and walked toward David's office, her heels clicking with authority. Several team members watched her go, including Rachel and Tom, who exchanged worried glances. They'd learned to read the warning signs when Victoria was in one of her moods. I continued working on the expense reports, but kept one ear tuned to the office dynamics around me. Conversations seemed more subdued than usual. People were typing more quietly, as if sensing that something was shifting in the atmosphere. 37 minutes later, Victoria emerged from David's office. Her face was ashen, her designer composure completely shattered. Her hands trembled slightly as she walked directly to her desk and began packing her belongings into a cardboard box that Margaret had quietly provided. She didn't speak to anyone. Didn't offer explanations or goodbyes. Just moved through her workspace like a ghost, collecting personal items and leaving behind the kingdom she'd ruled for 2 years. Rachel approached her cautiously. Victoria? Is everything okay? Victoria looked up, her eyes red-rimmed. No, she said simply. Everything is not okay. David appeared in the doorway of his office, his expression professional but serious. Team meeting in 5 minutes. We gathered in the conference room, the same space where Victoria had delivered so many of her toxic speeches. David stood at the front, his hands clasped behind his back. Effective immediately, Victoria Chen is no longer with Henderson and Associates, he announced without preamble. Sarah Mitchell will be taking over as interim marketing director while we conduct our search for a permanent replacement. The room fell silent. You could have heard a pin drop. Rachel's mouth literally fell open. Tom stared at me like I'd just materialized out of thin air. Jennifer blinked rapidly, as if trying to process information that didn't compute. Sarah brings 5 years of senior-level experience from Morrison & Klein, David continued, his voice carrying the authority of finality. She'll be conducting individual meetings with each team member this week to discuss new project assignments and department restructuring. Angela Foster raised her hand tentatively. What about current projects? The Hartford presentation is due Friday. Sarah will be taking point on Hartford, David said. Her analysis of their market position was the foundation of our entire proposal. Strategy. I watched the realization dawn on several faces around the table. The work they'd assumed was Victoria's had actually been mine. The insights they'd praised, the strategic thinking they'd attributed to their former director, it had been coming from the quiet woman in the corner all along. As the meeting dispersed, I remained seated, watching my former colleagues file out. In stunned silence. Some avoided eye contact entirely. Others shot curious glances in my direction, as if seeing me for the first time. David approached my chair. How does it feel? I thought about it for a moment, considering the weight of 8 months of systematic harassment, the careful documentation, the calculated patience. Quiet, I said finally. I expected it to feel more dramatic. He smiled. The best victories usually do feel quiet. They're built on substance, not spectacle. That afternoon, I moved into Victoria's corner office. Her nameplate was already gone, replaced with a simple placard that read S. Mitchell, Marketing Director, Interim. Through the windows, I could see the same Chicago skyline that had witnessed so many of Victoria's power plays. The office still smelled like her expensive perfume. Her motivational posters were still on the walls, ironic messages about teamwork and lifting each other up. I made a mental note to have them removed by tomorrow. My phone buzzed with a text from my husband. How was your first day as interim director? I typed back, exactly as planned. Because that was the truth. Victoria never understood. While she'd been busy performing dominance, I'd been quietly building competence. While she'd been collecting admirers, I'd been collecting evidence. While she'd been focused on destroying me, I'd been focused on becoming indispensable. The small recording device sat in my desk drawer now, its job complete. Sometimes the most powerful weapon isn't the loudest one, it's the one nobody sees coming. Over the next few days, the department dynamics shifted dramatically. Rachel, no longer under Victoria's influence, revealed that she'd been documenting her own concerns about the toxic work environment. Tom admitted that he'd been looking for jobs at other companies because he couldn't handle Victoria's constant criticism. Jennifer from HR scheduled individual meetings with each team member to discuss their experiences working under Victoria. It turned out that my recordings had opened the floodgates. Multiple employees came forward with their own stories of harassment, favoritism, and retaliation. I'm so sorry we didn't see what was happening sooner, Jennifer told me during our meeting. The complaints we're hearing, it's clear this was a pattern of behavior that went far beyond just you. I accepted her apology graciously, but privately reflected on how isolation works. Victoria had been careful to target people one at a time, making each victim feel like they were the problem, like they were alone in their struggles. 1 week after Victoria's departure, I called my first all-hands team meeting. The conference room was the same, but the energy was completely different. People sat up straighter, made eye contact, contributed ideas without fear of being ridiculed. I want to start with something simple, I said, standing where Victoria used to pace. I want each of you to tell me about a project you're excited about, something you've been wanting to pursue but haven't had the opportunity. For the next hour, I listened to ideas that had been suppressed, innovations that had been dismissed, creative solutions that had been shut down by Victoria's need to control every aspect of the department's output. Tom had a brilliant proposal for streamlining our client onboarding process. Rachel had insights about market trends that could revolutionize our approach to small business accounts. Even quiet Angela had developed a client retention strategy that could increase our revenue by 15%. Why didn't any of you bring these ideas up before? I asked. The room went quiet for a moment. Finally, Rachel spoke up. Because we knew Victoria would either steal credit for the good ideas or find ways to tear apart the ones she didn't like. 3 weeks later, David knocked on my office door with an official letter in his hand. The board approved your permanent appointment, he said, holding up the document. Congratulations, Director Mitchell. I accepted the letter with a quiet smile, but my real satisfaction came from the metrics I'd been tracking. Department productivity was up 18%. Client satisfaction scores had improved across all accounts. Most importantly, voluntary turnover had dropped to 0, no one was looking for jobs elsewhere anymore. There's something else, David said, settling into the chair across from my desk. The board was so impressed with the department's turnaround that they're creating a new position, VP of Operations. They want you to oversee not just marketing, but client relations and project management as well. I looked out at the Chicago skyline, thinking about the woman who'd tried so hard to destroy me. Victoria had been so focused on maintaining her small kingdom that she'd never considered the possibility that someone might be building an empire right under her nose. I accept, I said simply. 6 months later, I received an unexpected email. It was from a woman named Lisa Patterson, no relation to our clients, who worked at a consulting firm across town. She'd heard about the dramatic changes at Henderson and Associates and wanted to know if I'd be willing to speak to a colleague who was dealing with workplace harassment. I've heard you know how to handle these situations effectively, she wrote. I smiled and started typing my response. The recording device that had ended Victoria's reign was still in my desk drawer, but now it had company, 3 other identical devices that I'd purchased for women who'd reached out for help. Sometimes the best victory isn't just winning your own battle. Sometimes it's teaching others how to fight theirs. Outside my window, the city hummed with its endless energy, full of people fighting battles both visible and invisible. But inside our office, the air was finally clear of toxicity. And that, I realized, was worth more than any promotion or title. The queen bee was gone. The hive was finally healthy, and this time, when someone asked me how it felt, I had a different answer, like justice. 2 months into my transfer, I'd started noticing Victoria's patterns. She had a system, a carefully orchestrated campaign that she'd probably perfected over years of climbing the corporate ladder. It started with small exclusions. Oh, Sarah wasn't at that meeting, she'd say with feigned concern when someone asked about project updates I should have been included in. I'm sure it was just an oversight. But there were no oversights in Victoria's world, only calculated moves. The breakthrough moment came during my 3rd month when I was working late one evening. The office was nearly empty, just the cleaning crew and a few dedicated workaholics burning the midnight oil. I was printing out reports for the next day's client meeting when I heard voices from the conference room. Victoria was on a call with someone. Her door was cracked open just enough for sound to carry. I wasn't trying to eavesdrop, but her voice had that sharp edge it took on when she thought no one important was listening. The Portland transfer is becoming a problem, she was saying. I thought she'd wash out naturally, but she's more persistent than I anticipated. My fingers froze on the printer controls. No, her work isn't the issue. That's what makes this complicated. I need to be more creative in my approach. I realized she was talking about me. The Portland transfer, that's how she referred to me when she thought I wasn't around to hear it. I stood there in the darkened hallway, listening to someone plan my professional destruction like it was a military operation. Trust me, by the end of the quarter, she'll either transfer out voluntarily or find herself on a performance improvement plan that no one comes back from. That's when I knew this wasn't about personality conflicts or professional disagreements. This was warfare. And Victoria had been fighting it for months while I'd been trying to build bridges. The hardest part wasn't Victoria's direct attacks, it was watching people I'd considered friendly colleagues slowly turn away from me. Fear was contagious in that office, and Victoria wielded it like a surgical instrument. Marcus Webb from the design team had been eating lunch with me regularly until Victoria made a comment about keeping questionable company. Within a week, Marcus was suddenly too busy to join me in the cafeteria. He'd nod politely when we passed in the hallways, but the easy conversations about weekend plans and shared complaints about Chicago weather disappeared. Jessica Torres from project management had initially seemed like a potential ally. She'd rolled her eyes during Victoria's more pompous speeches and once muttered, "Someone needs to deflate that ego." But after Victoria publicly praised Jessica's presentation skills during a department meeting, the same week she'd torn apart my contribution, Jessica's attitude shifted. Suddenly Jessica was volunteering to work on Victoria's high-profile projects, staying late to perfect presentations that Victoria would take credit for. The eye-rolling stopped. The solidarity vanished. I watched this pattern repeat itself with multiple colleagues. Victoria was a master at identifying people's insecurities and ambitions, then using both as leverage. She'd offer just enough approval to keep people hungry for more, while making it clear that association with her targets would cost them dearly. By month 6, I was eating lunch alone most days. Not because people actively disliked me, but because being seen as my friend had become professionally dangerous. Victoria's most elaborate scheme came in month 7, and it nearly succeeded. She'd been planning it for weeks, laying groundwork with the precision of a chess master thinking 5 moves ahead. It started with the Brennan Industries account, a mid-sized manufacturing client that represented about 12% of our department's annual revenue. Victoria assigned me to lead the renewal presentation, which seemed like a vote of confidence until I realized it was actually a trap. "I'm giving you this opportunity to really shine," she'd said in front of the entire team. "Brennan is crucial to our Q4 numbers, so I know you'll bring your absolute best work." The presentation was scheduled for a Thursday morning. I spent 2 weeks preparing, researching market trends, analyzing their competitor landscape, developing strategic recommendations that could genuinely help their business grow. The work was some of my best, comprehensive, insightful, and backed by solid data. On Wednesday afternoon, Victoria called me into her office. "I've been reviewing your Brennan presentation," she said, her expression carefully neutral. "I'm concerned about some of the financial projections." She proceeded to tear apart 3 hours of analysis, questioning methodologies that were industry standard and raising concerns about data sources that were absolutely reliable. But she did it all with the language of mentorship. "I just want to make sure you're putting your best foot forward, and these clients expect a certain level of sophistication." By Thursday morning, I'd incorporated all her suggested changes, even though they weakened the presentation significantly. The financial projections became more conservative, the strategic recommendations less bold. It was safe, generic work that could have been produced by any mid-level consultant. The presentation went fine, not great, but fine. The Brennan team seemed satisfied, if not particularly impressed. They renewed their contract for another year with no increase in scope or budget. That afternoon, Victoria called another team meeting. "I wanted to address what happened with the Brennan presentation," she announced. "While I'm glad we retained the client, I'm disappointed that we missed an opportunity to expand the relationship." She then proceeded to present alternative approaches that could have secured a larger contract, approaches that happened to be identical to my original analysis before her interference. The same bold strategies she'd convinced me to remove were now being presented as her innovative thinking. "Sometimes in this business, you have to be willing to take calculated risks," she said, making eye contact with me. "Playing it safe might keep existing clients, but it doesn't grow accounts." I sat there watching her take credit not just for my work, but for the superior version of my work that she'd prevented me from presenting. It was breathtaking in its calculated cruelty. That's when I started researching recording devices. The audio recordings were just the beginning. Once I started paying attention to Victoria's patterns, I realized she'd been leaving digital breadcrumbs everywhere, emails that contradicted her verbal instructions, meeting invites that mysteriously failed to reach my inbox, project timelines that were quietly adjusted to make my deadlines impossible. I began taking screenshots of everything. The email where she told me the client meeting was moved to Friday, followed by her furious message when I missed the Thursday session that had never been rescheduled. The project brief that specified one set of deliverables, then the revised version that appeared in my inbox an hour before the deadline with completely different requirements. The most damning evidence came from our project management software. Victoria had administrative access, which meant she could edit timelines, reassign tasks, and modify project requirements without leaving obvious fingerprints. But the system kept version histories, and I learned how to access them. What I found was systematic sabotage. Projects that I'd been assigned with reasonable timelines were quietly adjusted to become impossible. Requirements that had been clearly defined were modified at the last minute to set me up for failure. Resources that had been allocated to my projects were reassigned to other team members without notification. She'd been playing a long game, building a documentary record of my supposed incompetence through digital manipulation. Each modified deadline, each changed requirement, each reassigned resource created a paper trail that would support her narrative if she ever needed to justify firing me. But she'd made one crucial mistake: she assumed I wouldn't know how to look behind the curtain. The morning after my meeting with David, I arrived at the office to find Victoria already at her desk, but something was different. Her usual commanding presence seemed forced, brittle. She was going through the motions of her normal routine, but I could see the cracks. She'd always been early to work, but today she was there before the cleaning crew had finished. Her coffee sat untouched, growing cold while she stared at her computer screen with unfocused eyes. When Tom approached with a question about the Williams account, she snapped at him with uncharacteristic sharpness. "Can't you see I'm busy?" she said, gesturing at her monitor where a blank email template sat open. I watched her throughout the morning, noting the subtle signs of someone whose world was crumbling. The phone call she took in hushed tones. The way she kept glancing toward David's office. The nervous energy that made her walk faster, talk louder, smile brighter, all overcompensates for the fear that was eating at her from the inside. At 9:30, she made a mistake that revealed just how rattled she was. She sent an email to the entire department that was clearly meant for someone else, probably her mentor or a friend at another company. "The situation is more complicated than I thought," the email read. "I may need to accelerate my timeline. Can we talk today?" She realized her error within minutes and sent a follow-up message claiming it was a technical glitch, but the damage was done. Everyone could see that their unflappable director was flapping when Margaret approached her desk at 10:15 with David's summons. Victoria's mask finally slipped completely. For just a moment, her face showed raw panic before she managed to reconstruct her confident facade. "Of course," she said, her voice pitched slightly too high. "I've been expecting this." But we all knew she hadn't been expecting anything good. "Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads."